When you don't know what else to do, just simply approach life as the butterfly would, with your head up and your wings out. Don't give yourself permission to not show up repeatedly using the excuse that I just don't want to get into the storm. Surrender is not giving up, but it's recognizing what is. Notice I didn't say two-sided. I said twofold. Everything that shows up is a lesson, and everything that shows up is a blessing. What if I told you a secret, Kelly?
Oh, tell me.
Every wall we have ever encountered has a door on it somewhere.
Okay, I'm speechless, and we're 7 minutes in. That was just so beautiful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Broken Beautiful Me, Stories of Hope, Gratitude, and Resilience. And today I am so honored to have as my guest, Ami Lynne Carroll. Ami Lynne is more than a guide. She is a trusted travel partner for those ready to step beyond the roller coaster of human struggle and into the divine rhythm of life. She's a practiced student of both human and the sacred, and she weaves the practical, walking beside seekers as they remember who they've always been but may have forgotten. A published author, a TEDx speaker, and the creator of the Life Charter program, Ami Lynne's work is a call to healing, liberation, and awakening for all that lives. Not just a teacher, but a seeker herself, she walks this path in truth, freshly discovered in the now of being. Ami Lynne, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Oh, Kelly, thank you for the welcome and the invite. And wow, I'm inspired just by hearing that intro. I can't wait for today's conversation.
Me too. So let's start for people, for our listeners who may not know about you and your work. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. Well, I am a firm believer that business is personal. If we're not the same person in our business that we are in our personal life, then there's going to be a disconnect somewhere and probably on both sides. And so when I share with people who I am and what I'm called to, it is a mishmash of the two. And to really distill it down, my life's experiences have afforded me and brought me to a place where I am right now, where my true calling is simply to be for another who I needed in my darkest hour, but couldn't find. And not because people weren't around me to support, but because I didn't know how to ask for. I didn't know what to ask for. And quite honestly, the belief that I wasn't valued enough or worthy enough to ask for that help. And so my walk has really afforded me the opportunity to bring to others or another. I'm the creator of the Life Charter program, which really brings into being the lessons that have brought me through my own struggles and challenges. So it's not some theory. Like I know it works, in the face of challenge or obstacle, in the face of life, just in general. And so, on the written business page, I am a spiritual transformation and trauma coach. I'm the creator of the Life Charter program. As you said, I've written a book. And for those who are wondering, no, the book is not about me. The book is about life, because we all have these shared experiences. The particulars may be different, but our walks are so similar. And for me, that messaging is so important, that where we are in our life right now, what our experiences have formed our story, but they're not our identity.
Yeah.
And how do we operate from a place that would seem to be in contradiction to our story being our identity? And so being able to be here with you and your listeners today, what a wonderful opportunity to talk a little bit more about that and invite others into their own life, sometimes for the very first time in their experience.
Because when people experience trauma, everybody copes in a unique way. And it's very dependent on what has happened. If you lose a loved one, for example, it's dependent on the type of relationship you had with that person. And so it can be very easily to isolate yourself. I think it feels sometimes like you're protecting yourself from any further pain. Um, when in actual fact, it's probably the last thing you should do. You need that community to bring you through.
Well, you need that community to bring you through for a myriad of different reasons, the least of which is you've never done this before. So why would you expect yourself to know how to show up in that space? If you've
Yes.
lost a mother, you've never lost your mother before. If you have lost a job, you've never lost that job. You may have transitioned out of other positions before, but no matter what the experience we are having, it is new and fresh. And so to expect ourselves to know innately how to navigate that in a healthy way is such an expectation that really sets us up for failure. And so what we do, as you just said, is we isolate.
Yeah.
We build up these walls around us from a place of desiring to protect ourselves. And I'm not saying that the wall is a bad idea, but what if I told you a secret, Kelly?
Oh, tell me.
Every wall we have ever encountered has a door on it somewhere.
Oh, I love that.
I've
Yes,
never seen a wall. Even the Great Wall of China
it does.
has egresses and entrances throughout it. And so we think that we've built this wall and that we cannot climb over it. We can't break it down because we were really good at building that wall, right? We
Yeah.
are fortifiers when we feel like we need to be protected. Well, the good news is that while we may not have been conscious about it, we built a door in that wall, and all we need do is go and open the door. And
Yeah.
the first step is just recognizing that the door is there because we feel so alone and isolated, oftentimes distraught.
Yeah.
And so it's that little piece of hope, just knowing the door is there. You have built it unknowingly because the truest essence of who you are acknowledged the need to protect, but knew that you would eventually need to walk out of that space of protection in order to heal, in order to grow, in order to evolve, in order to be your full being. And so that door is there. Sometimes we just need someone to help us find it.
Okay, I'm speechless and we're 7 minutes in. That was just so beautiful. That was so beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna need to snip that clip and listen to that over and over because I'm just thinking about all the doors that I haven't noticed, over the years myself.
Right, right,
It's because we're all human and it's our human experience, and we sometimes feel that we need to protect ourselves and we forget that growth requires courage. Um,
right.
yeah.
Well, and growth doesn't necessarily, let's think about courage for a minute. Like, so Kelly, if I were to ask you what's your definition of courage?
Um, well, I guess it would depend on where I was in my life.
Mhm.
For me, courage is standing in my truth. Courage
Okay.
is not trying to be everything for everybody.
Mhm.
Um, and courage is right now for me a very real thing for me is courage is showing kindness and empathy in an
Mhm.
unkind environment. That's my goal. I want to show in my actions and my life kindness and empathy because it's sorely needed.
I love that. And notice I asked you what your definition is before we jumped into this conversation, because your
Mm.
definition of courage may be different than mine. And
Yeah.
so if we jump into this conversation about courage and we don't understand what courage means to another, then we're not building a bridge.
That's
We're
right.
actually snipping, the steps of that bridge, that rope bridge. If we use the analogy of a rope bridge, we're literally cutting through the time there if we don't understand what another's idea or experience of courage is. And so for me, courage is integrity.
Mm,
And so therefore, that courage is less about boldness, but it also requires me to be as clear as I'm able in this moment about who I am and why I'm showing up right here in this moment.
yes.
And that I show up aligned with that integrity of who I know I am, so that as we begin to move forward, and yes, that takes courage, especially in a world where everyone has an opinion.
Hmm.
And opinion has now even progressed to a point where judgment is almost socially acceptable, as long as it's the proper judgment
Yeah.
based on someone else's definition of proper. And so for me, courage is showing up from a place of integrity and not feeling the need to be anything other than what I am in this moment. I don't have to project strength. I don't have to project weakness. I can simply be without judgment. And that to me is courage. So, as we begin to talk about this idea of moving forward from a trauma or a challenge or just a life circumstance, courage is such an important idea that we get really clear on for ourselves.
Hmm.
So often people are like, "So, what's your definition of success?" And it's like, I really don't have one, because to me, success is an end game. And I am less concerned about the end game than I am this moment and how I'm showing up in this moment for the people I'm showing up for in this moment.
Yeah.
And being aware of that. And if I can do that with integrity, then I guess the definition of success would be showing up with integrity in this moment based on what is needed in this moment. But we get so caught up in the words that we use that, one, we forget to make sure that we're building bridges with our words and
Yeah.
not throwing fire bombs or, Molotov cocktails with them. Because in the end of the day, when all the layers are peeled away, we will learn, if we take the time to have conversations, that we actually have more in common with people than we do differences.
That is so true. That is so true. And I will tell you, um, I've been working with the bereaved for 15 years. And it's been my great privilege to do so. And I have met some of the most incredible people. Um, we met on common ground. I didn't
Mhm.
care what differences we had. We were
Yeah,
both, if I met just one individual, I didn't care what was different about us because we both showed up for each other because we were hurting.
right,
And
right. And
and I
that's the humanity of it all.
that's the humanity, and that's what we need to keep reminding people is that you don't have to 100% agree with another individual on everything, but you do have to make yourself available, because when we go back to that wall and door thing, right,
Yeah,
it's very
absolutely.
easy, when you're hurting, but it's also very easy with those walls when you're angry,
Mhm.
and it can seem very justified as well. I just, this is why I have this wall. And but at the end of the day, the walls only disappear when we show who we really are,
Right.
when we are willing and courageous enough to show our humanity at the risk of maybe not receiving that same back.
Right. Right. And here's the other thing I will share with you in my experience. The wall never goes away, but we learn to navigate through the doors.
Yeah.
through the different doors. So this idea that we need to break down a wall. Well, I'm not strong enough. I'm not courageous enough. I don't have the right tools. Sweetheart, you don't have to break down the wall. We don't have to vilify what has served us in order to move forward from it.
Hmm.
We can cherish it, be grateful for it even, and recognize its impermanent permanence in
Yes.
our experience. And the impermanence comes from a deeper understanding of it. Because the walls are there. It's just like the walls in a house. We would never say, it's the walls of a home are there to create a structure, to protect us, to fortify us, to build a foundation. Now, sometimes we knock down walls on the inside because we're moving things around, we're repositioning, and maybe we expand the walls of our home. But the walls are still necessary in order for the structure of a home to exist.
Yes.
And the structure of a home exists to protect us. But when I leave the bedroom for my office, or I leave the bedroom for the living room, or I leave the kitchen for the front room, I don't now vilify the room I'm leaving.
That's a
I'm
great.
grateful that it was there and served a need and may serve a need in the future, most likely will tonight when I want to go to bed. So the idea of vilifying and canceling, in this 2025 culture, an idea because in this moment it doesn't serve us. That's why we begin to live this place from, as you said, anger,
Mm.
because we feel so conflicted. We're not in alignment with what we know to be true, because on the truth of our very being, those walls are going to continue to exist to do exactly what we built them for in the beginning, and that's to protect us. But as we find a new door, as we reposition that wall and the infrastructure inside our home, our life, our soul, what we find is that we're able to broaden the borders of our tent because it's not about decimating the wall. It's about seeing it for its useful purpose, utilizing it for that useful purpose and not giving it power when it's not in need or use, but
Yeah.
also not needing to destroy it. Because what happens is that when we begin this nudge to move out of a season in our life, whether it be grief or tragedy or relationships, like we label them all kinds of things, but when we begin to feel the nudge to push us into our next season, we are taught sometimes in society that we have to justify the progression. Well, no, our truest nature is always, our truest nature and being is always in movement.
Yeah.
So we're not meant to be stagnant. So the idea that we would need to destroy what served us for so long, or that we need to vilify it because it's toxic. Well, it wasn't toxic for a while, sweet girl. So can we not just find a place to be grateful for that? Because when we begin to move forward and we feel like we can't, it's because we're not in alignment with what we knew we truly are. And we are beings of love.
Yes.
What would you say if I suggested the idea that anger stems from and is nothing more but nothing less than love misunderstood?
Yes. Yeah, I would have. I think before you asked that question, I probably would have said anger was fear.
Right. Well, what is fear?
Then deeper, when you go deeper, it's love misunderstood.
So is fear.
Yes.
So here's a little scientific tidbit about fear. In our amygdala, in our brain, we is our creative centers and our fight or flight center. And so our imagination, which is our creative, is generated from the same place as our fight or flight. And so if we can imagine something to be awful, we can also imagine it to be serving, supportive, loving, caring. When we think about this idea of fear, I'm coming to realize that fear is nothing and more and nothing less than imagination misunderstood.
Yeah.
Because that creative part of our brain, and we say, well, fear is there to protect us. Well, that to me is a borrowed belief. That borrowed belief, and that belief is there in the intention is genuine. So the intention comes from love.
Yeah.
But if the idea is to keep us safe, is it to keep us safe from our future imaginings? Or is it meant to keep us safe in a way that we are where we are because we are here to learn and grow in the place that we are? So we're misunderstanding our purpose. Nobody promised us it would be easy.
No, I mean, we were not promised that at all. We were, I always feel like as I watch my life unfold, especially as the years pass, and I
Mhm.
look at, oh wow, look how that connected to this, and this connected to this, and here I am, and I'm beginning to understand that the things that I probably really struggled against years
Mhm.
ago when I was younger are the very things that made me who I am today and were actually gifts. And I didn't see them that way at the time.
Right.
So tell me about the life charter, because you said that it was, this is how you approached trauma.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit about that and how you help others with your lessons.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is to tell you the infancy of the Life Charter really came about on in February of 2007. I was participating as in an experimental program at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. I had stage 4 cancer. And my doctor, who is a dear, dear friend of mine, even today, in February of 2007, called me in and said, I need you to know that the prognosis is not good. You're not responding. And, you know, you need to go home and get your shit in order.
Oh my gosh.
The prognosis was 6 weeks in 2007. Up to this point, I had been a rule follower. I grew up in a military family. My father was a Marine Corps drill instructor. I'm one of 15 kids. My older brother and I found out at 42, were adopted. The other 13 are biological. You did what you did because you were told to do it, and not doing it brought dire consequences. So I was a rule follower.
Mhm.
I had been diagnosed earlier in my life with breast cancer, which I didn't understand because I ate well. Matter of fact, I was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was getting a physical before running the Leukemia Foundation Marathon in Maui. So all of these things just weren't coming together. And yet I continued to be a rule follower. If you do what you're supposed to do, then you'll be rewarded for that with an easier life.
Mm.
Rubbish. Life is not transactional.
Yes.
And so I received this news and I did what most people do upon receiving that news. And I went home and I cried.
Of
I sobbed. I was angry. I screamed. I shouted. I sat in the shower, and only because I couldn't figure out if the water from the shower or the water from my tears was actually, more volume in that moment. And then I woke up on this third day and it dawned on me, that's his opinion. What's my opinion? And for the first time in my life, I was recognizing that I had an opinion,
Yeah.
but I didn't know what it was because everything that I had done because I had been told to do so. And so I began to question. And I'll be honest, at first I questioned from a place of being a maverick. I was angry. I wanted to be a rebel. Like I wanted to question everything. And then the pendulum swung back to the center. And I began to question from a place of just simply wanting to understand experience, not understand the intellect. Look, I graduated valedictorian in my high school class, summa cum laude from college. Like if there was a societal benchmark, I had met or exceeded it.
Yeah.
So it couldn't be intellectual. It needed to be experience. I read every scriptural and spiritual text I could get my hands on, the Christian Bible, the Jewish Torah, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran. I spoke with people from all walks of life. I learned about the Baha'i faith. And what I wanted is like, and I recognized being a philosophy student in college is that the philosophers, the one thing that all of them had in common for the most part, is that they were all seeking the answer to the question, what is God?
Yeah.
And so the life charter, and I didn't recognize this at the time. So a number of years on, began to really come into clarity is there's 12 dimensions in our life. Our intellectual life, our spiritual life, our emotional life, our character, our physical fitness, our love relationships, our parenting, our career, our character, our vision. Those 12 categories make up the totality of our life. And for each of those 12 dimensions, there are 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars are what really matters. The first pillar is, what is our premise? What is our belief? And is it our belief or is it a borrowed belief? We
Mhm.
hear a lot about conditioned thinking or programmed thinking. And what I would like to suggest is that, yes, there absolutely is programmed and conditioned thinking out there. There are thousands, if not millions, of examples of it. But more so, what we live in is a place of borrowed belief. And we borrow those beliefs from our parents, our grandparents, our siblings, our classmates, college professors, our first boss, people who have been instrumental in our life. We borrow those beliefs from them because it's carried them to where they're at. So it should serve me also, right?
Right.
But what happens when it no longer is serving my path? Well, it's just a borrowed belief. So many people come into this space all of a sudden and they're having this crisis of faith. It's not a crisis of faith, it's a crisis of belief because we've been operating from this place of a borrowed belief, never having tested it, but taken it on as our own. And so when we recognize that a component in our life is rooted in a borrowed belief, if we can question that belief and really discern what it is that is our experience, because our experience will tell us truth. Our experience will tell us the metaphysical and the physical. And it can't be questioned because it's our experience.
Yeah.
A belief will project what we think something should be, could be, would be, if I only. So we
Mm.
get really clear on our premise in each of those 12 dimensions. And then we move forward into this idea of what's our vision? Not what is my mom's vision for me in this area. When I first went to college, I went to a university that would have been my father's choice. It was my father's choice. A semester in, I did the very first thing for the very first time in my life that I had never done before. And I made the decision to transfer schools, even losing a full ride scholarship because I wasn't at home. I wasn't growing. I couldn't stand it. The belief would be that for me to get a good education, I needed to go to a university picked by my father.
Right.
I realized that the experience of that was not feeding me and supporting me and made a choice otherwise. My experience told me that that belief was borrowed. So, what's my vision? And is it my vision? And that's why we have to get really clear on our beliefs first. Is it my belief or a borrowed one. Then we have this vision. What do I envision for my life? And this isn't I want to caution us when we think about vision. This is not fantasy football. This is football.
Yeah.
Fantasy football, man, these people are ardent fans of football, but it's still a fantasy. If you could put your ideal thing together, your ideal team together, what would it look like? And for me, vision is not about the ideal life, but what am I being called to as a parent? What am I being called to in my character? What is that internal calling as it relates to my finances? What, Babs? My finances? I have a calling to that? Yes, we have a calling in each of those 12 dimensions. So, what is that vision? And then, what's our purpose? We all know the big question is 2025. We've all heard Simon Sinek's, what's your why? But recognize we can't determine our why if we're still operating on that premise, that borrowed belief of someone else's belief. And our why only begins to crystallize when our vision for that life component is. And then our fourth pillar there then is, what's our strategy?
Yeah.
What are actionable? This isn't about smart goals, but it's about setting targets that will lead us forward and recognizing that every path created, every course created. I'll use the example really quickly of if we were on an airplane or a cruise ship, and our intent was to go from LA to New York. So I guess we can't do a cruise ship because cruises don't go over land. So let's go with an airplane for just a moment. There is a pilot, there's a co pilot, there's a navigator. Oftentimes, throughout that flight from LA to New York, we are course correcting. And don't nobody get upset with the navigator when he says we need to course correct. But if
Right.
we don't course correct because of the elements in the air, the weather, whatever, we may need to go up because there's mountains. We may need to go down because there's a storm. If we don't course correct through the journey of that flight from LA to New York, we will never make it to New York. And yet in our own lives, when we have an opportunity to course correct, we go from a plan to I have failed and we quit.
Yes. Oh gosh. I mean, I've done that many, many times in my own life where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, instead of just taking it and looking at it from a different perspective, you say, I guess I can't do this. I've failed.
Right. Oh, I wasn't meant to do this.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen, or I planned for it to happen. And so therefore, well, it's not for me. No, course correct.
It's part of the
I don't know
journey.
about you, but if somebody said you're going to get rid of the co-pilot or the navigator, I would definitely get rid of the co-pilot before I would the navigator on an airplane.
Absolutely.
And yet, when we are called to course correct, we want to throw the navigator out the plane
Yeah.
as opposed to allowing for what is coming up, for what is showing up, to give us a new opportunity to learn something more about ourselves. Because I believe that everything that shows up is twofold. Notice I didn't say two-sided. I said twofold. Everything that shows up is a lesson, and everything that shows up is a blessing.
Yeah. I believe that wholeheartedly. I really do. Hey guys, Kelly here. I wanted to jump in and let you know that you can find out more about my work by visiting my website at kellybuckley.com, or you can find my books on Amazon. Okay, back to the episode. What role do you see gratitude playing? You say everything is a blessing. So when you meet people on their journey, and they want to explore your life charter,
Mhm.
what do you say to them about gratitude and the importance of looking at life with a grateful heart?
Oh, Well, I think the first thing is to be really clear about where we currently are sitting. We can all tell ourselves that we seek gratitude, look, I've got a gratitude journal. So the very first thing that I do is I invite people to do a judgment journal, because let's get really honest about where our heart and our mind resides more often than not, and it's in judgment. And so you do 24 hours of a judgment journal, you are ready to jump full-fledged into gratitude. Let me tell you from experience, I did it because I was like, oh, everybody can do a gratitude journal. And I just got this little burr in my ear. I'm like, I'm going to go do a judgment journal. I'm really going to learn from that. And let me tell you, girlfriend, I learned a lot from that, but I would not ever recommend anybody do it for a long-term period, because if it does the job intended, it should startle you.
Yeah.
And it's not that there's anything wrong with you. It's society. We live in a place of conditioned judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment on ourselves, judgment on our environment, judgment on the people around us, judgment on the way things are unfolding, judgment, 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 judgment. I can't even say it straight without losing track. So when we begin to talk about gratitude, for me, gratitude, look, your first steps, you have to take baby steps. And in a moment of discord or challenge, in a season of discord or challenge, look for gratitude wherever you can find it, my friend.
Yeah.
But as you begin to progress through that season and you are evolving and changing and growing, then the invitation becomes to look for gratitude within the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Look, if I'm having a tough day, maybe I'm having a tough moment with a coworker, it's real easy to say to myself, oh, but Ami Lynne, your husband loves you dearly. I can be grateful for the fact that my husband loves me dearly and he understands me and he gets me, even though my coworker doesn't. It's an entirely different exercise to look into the heart and soul of my coworker who I am at odds with, that there is a chasm in our relationship, and find gratitude in that person, in that chasm, in that relationship. Because that's that reminder that we do have more in common than
Yes.
we do that is different. So gratitude is not meant to be a weapon. It is meant to be a course corrector. It's
Yeah.
meant to help us navigate. It's not meant to pull us out of the muck and mire.
No.
Matter of fact, we're only in muck and mire because we label it that.
That's so true. And I will tell you from my own gratitude journey, I had a gratitude journal before my son passed away. And, it was probably, well, it was kind of superficial when I look back on it now. My true gratitude journey happened the day that he died. That's when I started,
When it begins.
right in the middle of the mess, right in the middle of being ground into dust is how I felt, right?
Mhm.
And that's when I had this moment of, and I was a type A girl too. I'll
Mhm.
admit it.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
so I had always had plan A, B, C, D. I always had anticipated. And it was at that moment I was like, oh, I got nothing. I have nothing. I don't have any alternative. I don't know what to do. And it was at that very moment of surrender
Mhm.
that I said, okay, Kelly, and I call it a whisper in my ear, God's little whisper in my ear.
God whisper. Yep.
If you don't start looking for things to be grateful for right now, you're not going to make it. And I knew in my heart. And so right in the middle of the struggle, I could say I looked at so my son had a sports injury and he ended up drowning, and the divers were looking for him. So I was thankful for the divers who gave me him. I was thankful for his friends. You know, they were all rising seniors at NC State University, and they stayed, and they were 20 somethings, and it would have been a lot easier for them to go. It would have been easier for them to leave, but they stayed with us. And not only did they stay, their parents came. So, right in the middle of the darkest moment of my existence, all these blessings were around me because I surrendered to it. Do you see, kind of you reach that kind of moment, and that surrender needs to happen in order for you to see a new path?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by the word surrender.
Okay.
I think so often when we hear the surrender term, we think of the proverbial white flag. I can't do
Oh,
this. I'm
no.
not strong enough. I don't have the courage. And so, in answering your question, I feel like first it's important that I share that idea. For me, surrender is not giving up, but it's recognizing what is.
Yes. I agree with that definition wholeheartedly.
Recognizing what is going on, who is in front of me, what is the situation, and just being in alignment with my integrity as to what is. Because in that moment of surrender to what is, guess what? We find those doors in the wall that we built
Yeah.
are more readily available, one, than we even knew because we didn't know the doors were there.
Yes.
But two, we begin to recognize them for what they are because his friends were there, the divers were there. And those are blessings, but they're also lessons because the lesson in that space, from the outside looking in. So I never want to tell someone else what their lesson or their blessing is. But I can imagine from the outside looking in that one of the lessons is that it doesn't define us as negative, wrong, or unworthy to ask for help.
Yeah. That's so
It's
true.
actually a gift to the other person because that's their calling in life.
Yeah.
And it's not to preclude emergency or, tragedy, but to be there in someone else's moment of need
Hmm.
to help meet that need, whatever it may be, to
Yes.
the best that they are able. And no, the divers didn't meet the full need, but the friends and the parents and the
Mhm.
sense of community and being able to recognize them, maybe not see them for the fullness of what each of those were in the moment, but to be aware enough of their presence that as you walked through your grief, you weren't so alone in that because you had these flashlights
Yes.
of hope.
And, I often look back to that day, and I do think what a gift that on my first day of this journey, um, the message was loud and clear that love was all around me,
Mhm.
even though my heart was broken. Love was all around me. And I am grateful every day for the fact that I opened my eyes to see it.
Yeah. But here's the thing for those of us who maybe weren't aware on that first day of the journey, one, it's never too late.
No, never.
Gratitude is always present. Whether we acknowledge it or not doesn't mean, it's what's the phrase? The presence of darkness is not an indication of the lack of light.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, scientifically, we cannot see, acknowledge, know darkness without the presence of an iota of light to be able to see it as darkness. And so no matter where you are, if you're listening and you're in a moment or a season of despair, Gratitude is always there. And look, you don't have to be grateful for what is happening.
No.
And you don't have to travel it alone. You don't even have to know what the questions are to ask for help. But I will tell you that there is someone in your experience, and I know this to be true for absolutely everyone. And if we get really quiet, we know it too. There is someone in our experience that we can go to and say, I don't know the questions. I don't know what I need, but in this moment, please just be with me.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's why I am not a coach. I am a chief travel partner. I don't call myself a coach. I get to
Yeah.
travel with you on your journey. And sometimes I get to be the navigator and I get to help you course correct. Sometimes I'm the co-pilot. I'm just sitting over there, hey, if you need me, let me know. I'm going to take a nap. Sometimes I'm in the jump seat in the back because you've got the controls and you've got all the people in your life. You've got the right seats and the right tushies and the right seats on the plane. And so I'm on the jump seat in the back, flying standby, but I'm still there
Yeah.
because we don't have to travel this life alone. And it's so much easier to recognize the things we have in common versus the things that would separate us when we have a travel partner that's there to remind us of the things that we already know to be true about ourselves.
Mm. And that, what we already know to be true about ourselves, because there's a piece inside of us. And I have a book, it's about this big. I have it in my purse, carry it everywhere. The Paka Pema Chodron. And she talks about that unchangeable part of our heart within, that it doesn't change no matter what has happened to us, no matter what pain we have endured, no matter the joy or the sorrow. It is there, and it never changes no matter what happens. And I've read that Pocket Pema Chodron whenever the world is a little bit loud. If I'm in a waiting room or something, I pull that out and I just read a little bit. And I always, even though I've probably read this book through from front to back, I don't know, 100 times at least.
Mhm.
I always learn something new every time. And I think about that unchangeable piece and how we can lose sight of that,
Mhm.
um, and lose sight of just how miraculous and beautiful and valuable we are. Um,
Absolutely.
because
Every faith background teaches us that we were made perfect, whole, and complete. And from the moment of conception, that's what we are, perfect, whole, and complete. And
yeah,
so when we begin to think about this idea of change, right? Here's what I'm recognizing is that we're not changing. We are simply becoming who we returning to who we have been all along, but forgot along the way.
yeah,
We are that perfect, whole, complete idea of the divine. And no matter what faith background you ascribe to, we are all taught that in our in our moment of being, in the moment of becoming, when we enter this earth sphere, we were created perfect, whole, and complete. And so, if that is true, even with the idea of sin or struggle or all of these other things, what if those ideas of sin and struggle and all of these other things is really just man's attempt to work out his or her relationship with God to get back to what we were created, perfect, whole, and complete? You're not changing.
yeah,
You're simply remembering who you were all along, and that's why those ideas resonate with you so deeply. It's a truth that's been there as old as time, as the nursery rhymes would
yeah,
say.
yeah,
But because it's so rooted in truth, capital T, there's a resonance there that you may even say, man, that feels so comfortable and I don't know why. Be like, yeah, that.
It
And
is.
that's where we're at in those moments.
Yeah, and it is very interesting when you start to discover that piece of yourself, you know. I think that the first, you know, I remember this pivotal moment in my life, and I'm sure that for our listeners and for everybody, it's a human nature thing. You can relate where I became conscious of the conversation I was having about myself to myself in the mirror as I was getting ready for work. And I was like, "Girl, get it together. You pull yourself together. Who are you talking to?" I would never say I would never talk about another human being the way I was talking about myself. So it's funny how that first step of awareness, and once your eyes open to it, and then you start that journey to kind of rediscover who you are. There's another story that I read. It's about a golden Buddha. I think they discovered it in 1955, I want to say, in Thailand. There was a statue, and it was covered in plaster. And in 1955, they were cleaning it and kind of were kind of chipping away. And they discovered that beneath all this plaster, it was solid gold.
Yes.
And that it had been hidden centuries before invaders came, because they didn't want the invaders to take this most precious statue that they had in their village. And so then nobody, nobody survived. I'm not really sure the detail behind it, but what ended up happening was for centuries, nobody knew that beneath this plaster was this
And they
gorgeous.
were actually restoring the plaster
Yes.
time after time after time, that borrowed belief of what they were doing,
Right.
the deepest of good intention. And yet,
Absolutely. And so they find this miraculous discovery beneath it that they never knew was there. And every time I think about that story, I think that's all of us. We're all the golden Buddha under the plaster.
yeah,
We just have to keep chipping away at what's in the way of us rediscovering ourselves.
it's turning off the noise. It's surrendering to that idea that we're not in control. We can be in command, but we're not in control.
Mhm.
It's that surrender. It's that moment of accepting things as they are. And the crazy thing is, we think about this in that moment of surrender, we talk about things falling away. That moment of surrender is the moment that that first little piece of plaster fell away to reveal gold.
Yeah.
When we think about our own experiences, when such and such happened, I had this moment of clarity. It was fleeting, but it was there. That's a moment of surrender to what is. It's not, it's seeing through all of the layers. It's peeling back those layers and just simply residing in that perfection, that wholeness, and that completeness,
Mhm.
exactly as we are.
Yeah.
And when we can have a moment of that, guess what? That then gives us the experience to begin to engage with others, knowing what is beneath their plaster.
Yes. That's such a good reminder, because it does. If it does remind us that we all are made from perfection. We are all originate from the divine. And so I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, when I started this path, it certainly helped me become a more empathetic person. It certainly helped me be able to look at other people's struggles with a little more in understanding, be a little more gentle. Um, how can we? So, the world is a little complicated. Um,
Just a little.
you know,
Any given day. Sure, pick
yeah,
a topic.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do we? How do you venture out in a world that is complicated and spread this message? Um, because people seem to feel like they need to be in certain pockets.
Mhm.
So, how do we bring people together? I'm asking easy questions today.
I love it. I love it. And here's the thing. On the surface, it doesn't feel like an easy question, but at the root of who we are, it is so easy. And for those of you who are listening that know me, what I'm about to say is going to be zero surprise. For those of you who I'm just getting to know today, I'm going to introduce you to my spirit animal, which is the butterfly. And so, the answer to your question, how do we navigate this world on a day-to-day basis? And we navigate it in such a way as if we are the butterfly. We can navigate this world knowing the beauty of a butterfly, recognizing that the life cycle of a butterfly is very short.
Yes.
And so, what a butterfly does from moment to moment is done with intention.
Mm.
What is our intention? What's our purpose? What's our why? Why are we called to this moment? And if we're not going to engage in something fully with intention, don't engage. Be in alignment with your truth. And so if visiting this place or going to this event or having this conversation is not something that you feel like you can show up honestly, and remember, honesty doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
Honesty simply means that this is my perspective. Then allow yourself the grace to not show up. Don't put yourself in environments where you're not going to contribute and engage, but that will zap your energy.
Mm-hmm.
A butterfly shows up with intention. A butterfly shows up with grace,
Yes.
even in a storm. But here's the other thing about a butterfly. Butterflies will also take time during storms to go and rest.
Mm.
We needn't charge into every storm full on.
Yeah. It's
The
okay to
last
have
thing
a
I'll share,
reprieve.
it's absolutely okay to have a reprieve as long as it doesn't become an excuse to not show up.
Yeah.
Don't give yourself permission to not show up repeatedly using the excuse that I just don't want to get into the storm. Because
Mm-hmm.
here's the other thing I'll tell you about a butterfly. A butterfly with 70% of its wings lost or damaged can still defy gravity and take flight. So sometimes, even when we are 70% damaged or missing, we are called to show up to show others that we all must show up,
Mm-hmm.
and to do so with the grace of a butterfly and the intention of a butterfly. Because our time here to do the good that a butterfly would do is limited. It's not finite. And yet, making good choices, when to rest, when to take flight, when to not let the excuse of a damaged or missing wing keep us from taking flight.
Yeah.
Let the butterfly be your calling card. Would the butterfly do it? I bet you I could handle it too.
That is absolutely beautiful. You have shared so much wisdom in this. I mean, I could talk for another 5 hours with you.
I've
Um,
loved our conversation as well. I hope your listeners are taking nuggets away.
oh, I feel quite confident in saying that they absolutely are. Um, there's one quote that I want. First, your book, Conversations of Consequence: Lessons from the Still Small Voice. Um, I love the title of that book. That still small voice is a gift. Once you start to hear it, and there's one quote: "Truth that shimmers in the quiet of our heart." And I
Mhm.
just think that that is such a beautiful way to live.
Mhm.
is to rediscover
Mhm.
that truth that sits there. Um, so tell us a little bit now before we finish off this beautiful hour. And you have to promise to come back and talk to me again. I'm sorry. I'm
Not a problem at all. W Promise fulfilled.
okay. Um, Tell our listeners a little bit about the book and then Finding Your Truth, a Sacred Kaleidoscope workbook. So tell them a little bit about both of those and where they can find them and where they can find you.
Well, one, thank you for that invitation. I didn't come here to promote myself, but to have this beautiful conversation that we've had. So I am grateful to accept the invitation to share a little bit about the book. The book is written. There's 12 dimensions to it, so I'll bet you're going to see a pattern there based on our conversation. But the book was really written to weave a tapestry between divine wisdom and practical understanding and experience. And so there are some, what some people might feel, some flighty, esoteric ideas. But the book was written in order so that as you're reading through it, and look, it's not a sit down and read it all today approach. It's 500 and some pages, and it's meant to be taken in small bites because it's meant to create a practical guide to answering the question in these really challenging times, not how to. Because as much as we can champion how I overcame, what really matters at the end of the day is how do you do the same thing for yourself?
Yeah.
And so I take those lessons and I turn that around and we take that ancient wisdom and we bring it into practical everyday life scenarios so that at the end of each chapter, you can answer the question, how do I? Matter of fact, at the end of each chapter, there are journaling prompts and there are soul challenges to help you make that information an experience that you can build off of. So that's Conversations of Consequence, Lessons from the Still Small Voice. You can find it on Amazon. I bet you in the show notes, you'll be able to find the name. Just copy paste and search in Amazon. And depending upon when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it before, great. If you're listening to it after, we're actually going to be at the LA Times Festival of Books as a featured new author with Conversations of Consequence. So
Ah,
that's the last weekend of it in April in 2025. But you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my website. Finding your truth is also a really important offering to the world because we know oftentimes we don't know where to begin. We know the questions we're sitting in, but so often there are questions, there are steps that we get to take before we can really begin to dig into the questions that we are sitting in. Finding Your Truth is a workbook, walks you through some of those rudimentary stages to really getting back in touch with who you are and whose you are and why you are here. Also found on Amazon or on my website. Again, I'm sure the information will be in the show notes down below.
okay. Thank you so much. I look for my group that I have is called Just One Little Thing, and I ask people to find one little thing each day, especially when they're struggling, because sometimes it's difficult to look for big things, and little things are quite easy to find. But I have to say that my heart is so full after this conversation,
Mm.
and I am incredibly thankful for you.
Well, I have really enjoyed our conversation, and I'll leave you with one little thing. When you don't know what else to do, just simply approach life as the butterfly would, with your head up and your wings out.
Oh, love that. I love that. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. Okay. We'll see you next time, you guys. Thank you for joining me today on Broken Beautiful Me. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and insightful. Remember, every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to heal. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Your support means the world to me, and it helps spread the message of hope and resilience to more people like us. Don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with your friends and family. Together, we can create a community of strength and beauty in our brokenness. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and keep shining.